back to the podcast. I'm Paul.
And I'm Mark.
So we're back for episode 27.
27.
27? Yeah. We're almost at the 50.
So what are you shooting for?
I don't know. Whenever I get tired of doing it.
There's no limit, right?
There's no limit.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are we talking about today?
Well, you told me we're going to talk a little bit about ice fishing and
Get some ice fishing stuff.
CWD.
Yep.
And I was thinking, of course, we always talk about the weather, Paul, that being outdoorsmen, the weather is always relevant to our...
Yeah, we can talk about the weather.
Yeah.
I was going to mention some ice condition stuff.
Yeah. Well,
Relevant
that's
ice
there
fishing.
again. That's weather related. We're definitely, we have a dearth of snow and ice up here.
Before we get too far, have you read any of the news this morning?
I have not.
Did you hear about the guy in Rhode Island that was attacked by a coyote?
I did not.
Yeah, it was a rabid coyote, and he killed it with his bare hands.
Wow. Yeah, they're pretty tough animals.
Got a hold of it and strangled it.
Yeah, well, that's about all you could do.
It bit him in the leg. I think it attacked two people over the course of a few days or whatever. But bit him in the leg, and he got a hold of it and suffocated it to death. I was like, wow, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it is, Paul.
I'm not sure how big their coyotes are in Rhode Island, if they're like ours.
Yeah,
I
would assume they're comparable to what we have.
Eastern coyote.
Coyote. We've talked about that before. They're 25% wolf.
They've got
they've
wolf
done
genes
DNA. They're
floating around
25% wolf and 10% domestic dog. The coyote.
All right.
So I assume the other 65% is Western coyote.
Yeah. All right. And the other thing is, you've got a lot of hunting and fishing books. You're a pretty avid reader with. And this was one I was over to your house yesterday, and I stole this when I was there. Dawn of American Deer Hunting. A Photographic Odyssey of Whitetail Hunting History. It's a pretty interesting book.
It is. It is.
That book right there.
Yeah, I like the old style. You see how the deer camps used to be and stuff. So
this particular book I like old pictures.
So do I.
And stuff like that. And this book's straight full of. He kind of has it broken down in regions, right?
Yeah,
like Adirondacks, Maine. But it's right full of all kinds of old hunting pictures, and your mind. And I'm sure other deer hunters are the same way. When they see old pictures, their mind just kind of wanders on.
Back in the day,
what the whole scenario was like, what that whole hunting trip was like.
Right.
And, there was no video then, late 1800s.
Did you see the one in there, Paul? The guy, he's standing outside. There's a hollow log, and he's got his blanket inside the hollow log there. He's camping out in a hollow log.
Man, those guys were tough.
They were tough. Yeah, they used what they had.
Yeah, they did some tough stuff.
Yeah.
So, I'll put a link in the description below. It's a pretty interesting book.
Yeah.
I like stuff like that a lot. So, I was in your den, and I happened to look over and saw that sitting on the bookshelf.
Well, you're welcome to borrow my books anytime.
I'm taking that with me. I'll bring it. Oh, you can take it back tonight.
Eventually, you'll have them anyway. Nobody else will want them. So.
Oh, my word.
Yeah.
You sound like all your other deer hunting buddies.
Yeah.
Giving everything away.
Well, I'm not giving it away yet, but like I say, eventually, if you want them, I guess they should fall into your hands. You're the one that would be interested in them. I got one in the pipeline coming from Amazon. It's not deer hunting. It's a wilderness book. Cache Lake Country, I think it's called.
I'll start sharing more of them because we get a pile of them.
Yeah.
A lot of them are really good. A lot of them are, you got to be interested in, a lot of them are regional things.
Yeah.
Specific to where we hunt and fish.
Yeah.
So there's a connection there. They may not be the best books, but there's a connection to it that we like. So
I gravitate towards fly fishing, deer hunting, and but Maine outdoors. So some of the history of the Maine woods and stuff like that are interesting to me. Anything to do with outdoors in Maine. So
So we've done a couple ice fishing trips now.
Yeah.
And one thing, no one's come right out and said it, but I kind of feel I get a vibe from some of the comments that some people are a little nervous about the ice. Like kind of allude, like almost without coming right out and saying it, but almost like, man, how do you dare to go on the ice right now? Like with a snow sled and.
Oh yeah, that there's no problem there.
Not here.
No.
Other parts of the country and southern Maine.
There's some people, Paul, it could be March and you could have 3 feet of ice and they just do not like to be on the water in the wintertime. They don't like to be on ice.
And I understand that. And we were late getting started for that reason.
I can honestly say that that never crossed my mind.
No, because there's...
falling in or going through the ice. It never even crossed my mind going across the lake. So
and there's a couple of reasons. One is the nights have been... It's been cold. It's been warm relative to what we're used to. But it still is cold.
There's plenty of ice.
Like at nighttime, it's in the single digits or below zero.
Yeah.
But we're used to this time of year, you'll get a stretch of like weeks
below
where
zero.
it may not get into single digits.
Yeah.
You know, we haven't had any of that this winter at all. The other thing is there's no snowpack.
No. So on both of those, Paul, I just recently heard that it's been the warmest winter on record. And I looked up this morning. I was wondering what our snow total is. The total snow for the winter of 2023-24, and we're up to 55 inches.
Oh, my word.
Which is almost 50% below normal.
Yeah.
So we're way down in snow and way up on temperature. Yeah. Like I say, it's the warmest winter so far ever recorded. So
yeah, I don't think there's 6 inches of snow out back here.
No, there isn't probably a foot of snow anywhere up here in the woods. No. I don't think. There may be a little more in some places, but that would probably be about the tops, a foot of snow.
So bodes well for the deer.
Oh yeah,
but not for the winter sportsmen.
No,
that like to do winter
the
sports.
Skiing and the snowmobiling has suffered,
and even the ice fishing in other parts of the country.
Yeah,
I've talked to some people, like northern Michigan.
I've seen that out in Michigan and Minnesota and Wisconsin, Paul. They're pretty much the same thing. There's no snow and warm temperatures.
Yeah. So. But yeah, as far as like our local lakes here, we're fishing watersheds that they're stagnant. There's no moving water really. We're not near any thoroughfares.
No, you would always have to, even in cold weather, you have to be careful of that. Any inlet or outlet or whatever.
And if you look at the ice, it's over a foot thick.
Yeah, you're not going through.
And it's quality ice. It's nice and blue.
Yeah.
Clear.
Looks
just like glass. It's fine. It's good ice and it's safe. And there's no snow on it.
Yeah.
So it's still producing ice right now. But yeah, other parts of the country.
Yeah.
So it won't be long and we'll be spring fishing.
Yeah.
The way things are going.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely, the way things are looking, definitely in April this year, I think the ice will be going out.
And contrary to popular belief, a lot of people will say that the ice sinks.
Well, we've talked about that.
Ice doesn't sink.
Does not happen.
It's impossible.
Does not happen.
Yeah.
It's a wives' tale. We got a few of them. There's a few of them kicking around, but that's a popular one too. I've heard that from a lot of people, and having grown up on a lake, having the camp there, I've watched the ice go out many times. In fact, I've watched it go out in front of the camp, right, the last bit of ice on the lake, being right in our little cove there, and it just breaks up and melts.
Yeah.
There's no sinking.
No.
So.
And the science behind it proves that as well. Density equals mass over volume.
I agree.
It's less dense in water.
I agree.
I mean, it's interesting. So if you, like I mentioned, density equals mass over volume, water does something weird. So typically solids are actually more dense than the liquid form. And it has to do with how the molecules align when they form a solid. Water does something weird where the way a water molecule is designed or shaped, it actually, when it forms a solid, it kind of expands. Mm-hmm. Well, it does expand.
Sure does expand.
And if
Frozen
you don't,
pipes.
That's right. If you don't believe me, fill a bottle full of water,
put it in the freezer,
and see what happens.
Right.
So now you've got that same mass of water taking up more volume.
Yeah.
So it's actually less dense than the liquid form. So therefore it floats.
Yeah.
Can't sink. And yet water also does something else that's kind of weird too, is when it melts. So from 0 degrees Celsius to 4 degrees Celsius, it actually increases density. And then at 4 degrees Celsius onward, it decreases density.
So there's a phenomenon that I used to read about all the time. It was called a lake would turn over in the springtime when it when it hit 39 degrees.
Well, that's 4 degrees Celsius.
Right.
Right there.
It would literally, it would turn over.
So you're right. So from 0 degrees up to 4, it gets denser. It's most dense at 4 degrees Celsius. That water sinks and actually feeds the bottom of the lake or the watershed. And you get this cycle.
Right.
It's weird. Water's a pretty cool.
Yeah. I always remember as a young man reading, of a lake turning over, and the number I do remember was somewhere around 39 degrees or whatever, that it would
and that's right
would
about,
literally turn over, the lake would.
That's right about where water's at its densest.
Yeah.
So
I didn't know the scientific lingo or stuff.
Yeah, it all has to do
but
with H2O. Yeah. Those 2 hydrogen atoms and the oxygen atom, and how they interact with each other.
Yeah.
It's pretty neat. Some people may not think it's neat, but I think it's neat.
Yeah. Well, it's a real thing, and it's and if I remember, they always, the reason they brought it up in these fishing books and stuff was, I think the fishing was supposed to be good when the lake turned over.
Oh, it makes sense. You're getting this cyclical motion in the water.
Yeah, in the springtime when the lake turned over, it was supposed to be. I believe, if memory serves me correctly, that the fishing was supposed to be good then when it turned over.
Yeah, that stands to reason.
So, yeah.
So we'll go back to our last fishing trip. I don't think we've had a podcast since we went with Dan and his son. Fishing was all right.
Yeah, it was a few small ones, only one decent fish. And
the salmon that you caught was, what, 20 inches?
Yeah, 18 or 19 in that area. Yeah, it was, your mom and I ate it at one sitting there.
That's good stuff.
Yeah, we baked it and ate it. It was very good. Yeah. It was excellent.
And speaking of eating fish, they made some white perch. We had a fish feed.
We did.
And they'd fried some white perch.
Yeah.
Man, that was...
Oh, it wasn't all about the fishing. We went up to have a good time. It was the experience, going with some new people and to a new place, staying at a camp, and that's always a lot of fun to stay at a camp. And
you got a new battery for the sled?
I did, yeah. That's replaced. Everything seems to. I started it up yesterday and loaded it on the truck, and everything seems to be running great.
Why the heck they don't put a pull cord on?
Yeah.
Make any sense to me, but
that does not, Paul, make any sense.
How hard can it be to have?
Well, like Danny's, they do. His has got electric start, but it also and he doesn't bother with the electric start. He just uses the pull cord.
Yeah.
So why they wouldn't do both ways, I don't know.
I mean, especially if you're out, camping out or doing something like that.
Right.
It gets cold
anytime you're on a snowmobile, you're out away from roads and stuff most of the time. So you could be up a creek if you can't start your sled. So
you don't want to rely on a battery.
No.
In the middle of winter.
No.
Up here.
No.
So I guess we can talk a little bit about chronic wasting disease. What do you know about it?
I know of only I've read that it's caused a lot of damage out west over the years and stuff. And as far as I know, there's never been a case in the state of Maine.
No, you're right. The prevalence, there's no prevalence here.
Yeah.
I think the closest is New York.
Yeah, that's about all. I don't know a lot about it other than, that I've read a lot of, different incidences out west and stuff where the animals have caught it. And
a lot of people call it deer zombie disease.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I don't like that. It sounds kind of apocalyptic. It's big, I guess. I mean, we won't go through all the symptoms and stuff with it. That's all kinds of info online about that. But it's basically a demented deer. It's almost like a form of dementia. What happens is, so it's caused by a prion. So it's a prion disease. And so what's a prion, you might ask? Well, a prion is a protein, and I can remember learning about this years ago and was always interested.
I thought that was on Star Trek.
It could be.
That was Klingon.
Klingon?
Some Trekkies will get that.
What was a Klingon? I'm not a Star Trek.
One of the Klingon was one of the I can't believe I'm talking about this. Was one of the aliens out in outer space, a Klingon.
A Klingon?
Klingon warriors, yeah. They Star Trek, they were always fighting with the Klingons. So.
All right. I never was into Star Trek or Star Wars.
Well, I really wasn't into it, but it was back in my day, and we had limited TV, so you watched what you could.
You were stuck with...
It was popular. So
yeah, okay, so back to prions. What prions are, is there a protein that becomes almost virus-like. And we see it in humans, actually. The most common form, and it's not common, but the most common disease caused by prions is what they call Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease. And again, it falls under this family of diseases they call transmissible spongiform encephalopathies. It's like mad cow is one.
Right. So that can be transferred to a human, CWD?
No,
it can't. Okay.
So we'll go back to there are forms of diseases that are caused by prions in humans.
Right.
But they're really, the human forms really aren't transmissible. Mm-hmm. They form spontaneously. Like more than 80% of them just form on their own. And what happens with the prion is proteins in our body are responsible for a lot of functions. So not just like the structure of our muscles and stuff like that, but there's enzyme activity. So enzymes are proteins. A lot of our cellular functions are proteins that do those functions. And a protein just is a string of amino acids, but it's not just like a linear string. They have a 3D structure. So they fold and they can form into this certain structure. And how a protein folds affects how that protein functions. So whatever its function is. And what happens with a prion is there's an error in that protein folding, and it becomes pathogenic. It causes disease, and it can be almost virus-like. So it basically forms. So you hear that transmissible spongiform encephalopathy. It basically are these misfolded proteins, prions, that damage parts of the brain and basically put holes in the brain. So it looks like a sponge. And causes basically like a dementia. So in people, like Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease basically kills someone in less than a year. Yeah. And like about, I want to say 15% of the patients with that, it may have a genetic basis. But again, most of them form spontaneously. There are a few cases of like brain surgeries and stuff like that, where it's been transferred from dirty utensils.
Oh, no kidding.
But it's really uncommon. The transmission of it is really uncommon, which is weird for CWD, which has always kind of perplexed me. Like I can remember when I was in school learning about prions, like, okay, it's not all the forms, these human forms are not really transmissible like CWD is. So it makes you wonder, there's something biochemical that's a little different about those prions that make them that much more transmissible. Just to kind of create a connection. So other diseases in humans that also have to do with protein misfolding, and these aren't prions, but like Alzheimer's dementia has to do with probably the fundamental understanding of what causes Alzheimer's is misfolding of proteins. So you get what's called these beta amyloid plaques, which are just a cluster of proteins. And then you have another one, which is a misfolding of what they call a tau protein, which causes these neurological like tangles. So people with dementia, obviously memory loss, confusion, you'll see motor disorders and stuff like that. And people with dementia usually die from, you start to have trouble swallowing. So you choke on something.
Right.
So you get aspiration pneumonia, malnutrition because you can't swallow. And the same thing happens with CWD, is the deer develops, they kind of waste away from malnutrition. Obviously you can't assess their cognitive status, but you got to assume there's some sort of cognitive decline. And they end up dying. It's always fatal.
And that is transmissible among deer. They can pass
deer,
obviously.
So the interesting thing with CWD is it's fairly transmissible, and like Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease, I'll use that, as kind of our comparison in humans. Like you're not going to catch it from someone's spit,
right?
Saliva. It usually has to be like nervous system tissue, brain tissue. But with deer, yeah, these prions are noticeable in like feces, saliva. So anything that can get deer congregated close together,
right?
That transmissibility is going to be a lot higher.
Yeah.
So it was actually, I think it was like early 60s was the first time it was discovered. Out in like Colorado and Wyoming, out in that area. And that's where it's most common.
Yeah, out west, like I say, I've always read about it out west and Midwest and stuff.
And the thing is with CWD is there's a lot of knowledge gaps in it because it's been such a slow progression and slow spreading. It's kind of insidious in how it spreads because in deer, there's like an incubation period of up to 2 years.
Oh, no kidding.
So the deer may not present with any like overt symptoms.
Yeah.
But they've got an infection of CWD. So it can be, very insidious, very sneaky, very cryptic as far as it spreading.
Right.
And
so by the time you find out, it, like you say, it could have spread pretty widely.
Yeah.
By the time in 2 years, I mean, it can,
So we're lucky on the Northeast, that it's not here. I mean, and again, the prevalence in a lot of these areas, it doesn't seem like it's like super transmissible. Like it just goes wildfire through the population. But it's still concerning. And one of the concerning aspects is, it jumping from deer to humans.
Right.
Right. That's something.
Now, Mad Cow did that, didn't it?
Well, Mad Cow was kind of weird in that not very readily it did. So Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease, by itself, there's a variant form that actually was connected to mad cow through the consumption. So mad cow is bovine spongiform encephalopathy. And what happened with mad cow was, I believe there was an intermediate beef bovine. I think we're like the intermediate host, which is what allowed it to jump from animals to humans. So the consumption of a cow that was infected with BSE. So that's one thing that like epidemiologists and stuff in the country have looked at is these places that have higher prevalence of chronic wasting disease. Are there any cases of like a variant of Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease? And there's not.
Okay.
So basically the prevalence of that is the same at those states as it is with states that don't have CWD. But the big question for me that I think about is, I think scientists sometimes and I'm sure they're thinking the same way, but they think of like mad cow and they're looking for, some sort of presentation in a person that's very similar to CJD, Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease. And because CWD is transmissible, seems like there's a lot of these prions found in a lot of other organs. So you typically focus on like the nervous system, spinal cord,
brain
tissue.
Yeah.
Right. You want to analyze that because that's where you're going to find these prions. But I guess, it's present in saliva,
right?
Feces, urine, stuff like that. Prions can remain in the soil for a long time. They're hard to kill because they're very simple. They're way simpler than a virus. Prions have no genetic material inside of them like a virus does. A virus has some sort of genetic material inside of itself. And prions don't. They're just a protein that is folded incorrectly. And so it makes you wonder if there could be like a different presentation in people as opposed to that kind of prototypical, what they call TSE. But I don't know, something to think about. Because if you shot a deer and it was infected, I mean, right now it doesn't seem like if you ate it, it would bother you.
Right.
But that's not 100% certain.
Right.
So I guess right now, a lot of those places, they recommend testing, right? If you shoot a deer that is in an area that has known prevalence of CWD.
And I do know that and I don't know because I haven't been outside the state hunting in a long, long time, but, not bringing back the skull cap or having it completely clean or whatever.
Yeah, that's one way to prevent.
To keep the chance of spreading it down.
Yeah. And the other concern is it spreading to livestock,
right?
Domestic livestock,
right?
Because then that increases its exposure to the human population,
right?
Because we consume a lot of livestock. That's kind of our, which could then increase the odds of it becoming, something that could infect us,
right?
But prions are super interesting, and it's something that I've, always read about early on back in college and stuff. And there was always students doing presentations like on Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease and stuff like that, because they were kind of oddball stuff that a lot of people wouldn't know about.
Right.
And class, students find that interesting. They want to present stuff that's kind of your atypical pathogen. And
so this CJD, how rare is it in humans?
It's rare. I don't have the actual. I should have looked up the prevalence of it.
Yeah,
but it's rare.
It's rare.
Yeah. And again, you get this. It's basically a form of dementia that is really rapidly progressing. But you get these. You lose brain tissue. These little holes. It looks like a sponge. A sponge has holes in it, and usually within a year, it kills a person.
You're going.
Yeah, more prevalent the older you get.
Yeah.
Because again, it's a sponge.
And it doesn't seem like a very good way to go either, if there is a good way to go.
No, if anyone's ever dealt with someone with Alzheimer's, they'll know.
Yeah.
Or Parkinson's, someone who gets like Lewy body dementia from Parkinson's. And that again, so Parkinson's has a dementia that's associated with it. I think Robin Williams actually had what they called Lewy body dementia. And that's from Lewy bodies are a protein that's accumulated in the brain. And, they end up with dementia. You get memory loss, confusion, motor disturbances, balance disturbances, and you end up, not even being able to swallow or struggling to swallow, choking.
We had a friend here last week that for supper, and his mom was going through that, right?
Yes. It's a terrible disease. It's
because
terrible.
A lot of times your body can still function and everything, but
it's terrible for the family. There was a good documentary, and we watched it back in school. I think it was my first year of grad school, and I think it was just to kind of open the eyes to the students on like Alzheimer's disease. It doesn't really affect the patient per se. Right. They don't know what's going on. They get to a point where
it's the family or the caregivers.
It is cruel to the family, especially when you see like a husband and wife.
Oh yeah.
And the husband just like there was one in this documentary. He just was like he was just oblivious. Yeah. Like it's very hard on a spouse.
Yeah.
Right. Their spouse is no longer there.
And it's pretty common, isn't it, Paul? I mean, dementia and Alzheimer's.
Yeah. Well,
I don't think we've ever dealt with it in our family.
No. You can do things to prevent it, right? Just think of the common adage: if you don't use it, you lose it.
Right. You live a healthy lifestyle.
Live a healthy life. But use your brain.
Right.
It's probably one of the best ways to prevent that. Not with prions, obviously. Yeah. But again, it's pretty rare. Our body is so, and I didn't want to get on too many side tangents with this because I can get off on some really boring stuff. But our body is super interesting. It's very complex.
Oh yeah,
right. There's a lot of stuff going on, and unfortunately, and I think most people have the ability to comprehend it. And I feel like in our news and stuff like that, they dumb things down. And it's almost like a reductionist mindset, and they oversimplify things, and they're missing like a lot of important stuff, and they fail to kind of paint that picture of how complex our body is. Just if you look at, just with, let's just say drug companies with like producing a vaccine, you'll get like a lot of focus on like when they're promoting it, it produces antibodies. We'll say, well, that's great. It produces, you get an antibody response to the antigen, but that doesn't mean, that's only a small portion of your immune system.
Right.
That doesn't mean that it's creating immunity just because there's antibodies there.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot of other stuff in your immune system that's at play that makes your immune system as robust as it is and responds the way that it does. That's more than just antibodies.
Right.
But the thing is everybody knows to a rough extent what an antibody is, and they connect that with being immune to something, the development of antibodies.
Going to help them.
So they use that.
Right.
But it's so complex. Like when you look at like a protein misfolding, our body has ways to deal with stuff like that. It makes mistakes all the time. Sometimes the protein will misfold by accident. Sometimes it's the environment. Maybe it was like a lot of inflammation going on, stuff like that. Maybe something genetic. There's a genetic abnormality that caused that protein to misfold, or that protein wasn't produced the way it should have been. Therefore, it misfolds. And your body has a whole host of mechanisms to deal with stuff like that. Anytime it makes a mistake, it basically has what they call programmed cell death. So let's say if something messes up in a cell, it basically will kill the cell.
Yeah.
Right? That's how you prevent aberrant cells from going about forming cancer and stuff like that.
Right.
Is your body just like, it's called apoptosis, just kills the cell and starts all over. So our body's wicked amazing and super complex. So yeah, when you're dealing with complex systems like this, there's a lot more to think about than, I guess, back to the immunology comparison, that just antibodies. There's way more going on. And as you think about that stuff, you can actually get yourself going down a rabbit hole. Like, it's amazing that we can even sit here and survive. Like, if you just look at clotting,
right?
Like the simple act of cutting your finger, and your body clots to stop the bleeding. But miraculously, your body keeps it all in check in just a way that you don't just clot up and die.
Yeah,
it's supposed to. You're right.
Yeah.
Things go.
Yeah.
Things break down. Stuff happens where your body doesn't work the way it should.
Yeah.
If you just look at autoimmune disorders and stuff like that. But yeah, when you start like really thinking about, what the heck's going on? Like, it's amazing that we function, and we take it for granted. We cut ourselves, bleed for a second, and it stops, and you just go on living your life. But when you sit there and think about that stuff, you're like, man.
But most of the time when it fails, it's probably related to something we did or whatever.
Oftentimes.
And there again, a high inflammatory diet or stress.
Yeah.
I think there's a big connection, isn't there, Paul, between autoimmune diseases and stress and stuff.
There is. So it creates an inflammatory environment. You'll see a connection between
cortisol.
You'll see a connection between autoimmune disease, like certain triad of autoimmune diseases. We'll say like RA, inflammatory bowel disease, and stuff like that. You'll kind of see a commonality amongst them all. And that actually brings up a good topic. About, it's probably 10 or 15 years ago. There was a newer science. It's not new now, but epigenetics. And epigenetics is really cool in the fact that, so you'll get a lot of people that will say, they'll just chalk it up to I'm genetically predisposed to that.
Right.
It's my genetics. Well, it's not just, you're not just a sum of your genes. There is this whole science of epigenetics, which studies how our environment influences how our genes are expressed.
Right.
So there's a huge interplay between our environment and our genetic expression of certain genes, or just genes in general. And it used to really annoy me when I was younger, right? Just a young student starting out. I can remember I had crusty old professors that it used to annoy the heck out of me, because you're looking for, let's say, like a recipe for something, right? Like if you want to treat a patient or something like that, you're kind of looking for like, okay, they got this, I do this, this, and this. And there was one in particular, and looking back now, she was right. It used to annoy me. And she always said, well, it all depends. And it basically boiled down to, in other words, Paul, there's a lot more going on with someone than just, they've got X disease. There's all these other influences affecting that. And you got to take the whole thing in consideration. And she was actually a neuroscientist, and she said the same thing with regards, and it was actually very bright, is she's like, as far as the brain is concerned, she's like, we know everything about the brain except for how it works.
Yeah. Pretty complicated.
And she's like, we got all these structures. We know, what this structure is, what this, where speech is coming from, and how this is functioning, but we don't really know how it all works together.
Yeah.
There's so much to it that we don't even know.
Yeah.
So that's understanding, complex systems. And so when you get back to, the interplay between our environment and the expression of our genes, there's an interplay. You're not just, relegated to what your genetic makeup is.
My terminology is, we do have a say in it.
We do.
Yeah.
Well, what we do and what we expose ourselves to.
Right.
But people have what's called genetic vulnerabilities to things.
Yeah, absolutely. Some are more predisposed to
you're right.
Yeah.
So you'll look at like with epigenetics, let's say our genes are all packed up into little tight coils inside our cells. And there's a lot of genes that aren't accessible. Mm-hmm. But you can have some sort of environmental stimuli that causes that coiling up of that genetic material through like acetylation and deacetylation, cause that to relax. And now you have genes that are now able to be translated and transcribed that were never accessible, but because that's relaxed and those genes are now accessible, they can now be expressed through some environmental stimuli that's caused that to kind of relax and open up.
Yeah.
And that gene is now there to be expressed.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool. And it just shows you how complex of an interplay there is between, us and our instruction guide that created us, our genetic material.
Yeah.
And how the environment influences that. It's crazy. So it kills me when someone says, well, I'm genetically predisposed to that. It's like, well, there are things that
you can do
that are going to change,
how
those genes are expressed. Not totally. There's some things that, is just a genetic defect and is what it is. But a lot of times, no, it's not. Even if you look at like anxiety and depression and stuff like that, there's people that are like, are genetically vulnerable to being depressed, but doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be.
Right. There are so many things that you're right that, we could go down that diet and exercise. Oh, yeah. And even now, a big thing that most people probably wouldn't want to do, but I mean, they say it has a big effect on depression and anxiety is cold water therapy.
Yeah.
If somebody, was willing to.
See, and that's the problem. And I don't mean to get on this
here we go.
Tangent of like health and science, but that's one of the problems. Like, you want to help people get better, healthier in life, and they don't want to do the hard part.
Right.
And it's very frustrating because on one hand, you're like, it doesn't have to be this way.
Nope.
At all. All you have to do is commit to some change.
Yeah.
But
do you know, years ago, Paul, I read an article. This is a long time ago, and they, we're always searching for that magic bullet that that silver bullet that's going to make us well. And it existed all, and they said it exists. And this was a long time ago. I read the article, and it was diet and exercise. Yeah. It's a magic bullet.
Look at a photo.
But we don't want to use that one.
Look at a photo of people walking down the street back in the 1930s.
Oh, boy, yeah.
And what do you see?
Yeah, our diet has...
and it's not that they ate super, I guess, healthy in the terms of what a lot of people would say nowadays.
They ate a lot of fat.
They're not doing keto. They're not cutting out carbs. They're not, but they ate real food.
Yeah.
And
I've read since the advent of seed oils, Paul, and we talk about canola oil.
Terrible.
And that there's a direct correlation between the consumption of seed oils.
Yeah, super pro-inflammatory.
And obesity and diabetes.
Yeah.
They follow the same curve on a graph.
Yeah,
So as society has turned more towards processed foods with these seed oils in them, and we're talking canola oil and soy oil and
palm kernel oil, safflower oil,
sunflower seed oil, and that our health even more so than sugar.
They put it in everything. If you
if
you look on say you buy a bag of almonds, right, and they're lightly salted, they are covered in seed oil.
Yeah.
Popcorn, lightly salted, it's covered in seed oil.
Yeah.
All of this stuff is, unless you are really careful on what you buy,
and you have to read.
You've got to do.
You have to read labels, which we do.
Yeah,
we read labels.
You got to do your work. And unfortunately, it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
It's not a cakewalk by any means, but I didn't mean to get on that.
Yeah. Well,
and I knew when I was looking at,
I know a little bit about that, diet and stuff and things to avoid and things to not avoid and. We used to think butter was a big problem and stuff, and now we're it's not so much butter.
Eat real
eggs.
Eat real butter.
Yeah, seed oil and ghee.
Just eat real butter.
Eat real butter.
Don't eat sticks of it at a time, but
yeah.
So I try not to get on these topics because when I start talking about topics like this, I can just go on and get down some awful tangents. But so CWD. The whole prion thing was really intriguing. I've kind of avoided it for a while, but I'm like, I'll mention it and because it's interesting, it's unique, it's different than like what is it, blue tongue and
EHD, epizootic hemorrhagic disease.
Yeah, those are viruses. Those are caused by viruses. And there's a vector. It's an insect that actually carries the virus. Those are different than CWD, but CWD is more questions because I think of like stuff like, well, how could we prevent spread? Short of killing the animal and isolating those animals,
right? And in the wild, you really can't do that. I mean, in the wild,
no. I mean, right now, that I'm aware of, their only recommendations for prevention is obviously not bringing animals from infected areas to uninfected
transporting,
areas.
Right?
Not feeding deer in those areas or doing stuff to get deer to congregate closely. That kind of herds them all together. Stuff like that to keep transmission down. But I think of things like, if you could maybe knock out the gene that codes for the protein.
Yeah.
Right. Then you could stop it there. Or maybe, some immunotherapy that blocks or stabilizes the protein from misfolding. I don't know if they'll ever do anything like that or if they'll ever even look into it, but those are things that, I kind of think of, like, is there some way that we could, because there's definitely something different. Like, why is it, in us, these prion diseases, call them TSE, transmissible spongiform encephalopathies. Why is it, we don't transmit them to each other that readily? They pretty much form spontaneously, but not CWD. So biochemically, there's something different with that prion.
Yeah.
There's definitely something different going on. And I think that's what scientists need to look at, maybe more beyond the scope of just the neurodegenerative aspects and sampling, nervous tissue. But what about, those prions in the periphery? If it's in the spleen or in the skin or in the eye, what is different about that?
Yeah.
And I wonder how transmissible that is. Like what kind of numbers are present of those prions to spread it? Because you've got to have some sort of an amount to inoculate another organism. And it can stay in the soil for quite a while. And that's the problem with Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease. Like when they found, that it could be transmitted from dirty surgical utensils or equipment. Now, if they have any question of some surgical material being exposed to that, because prions are so resistant to sterilization,
right,
that they just destroy
get rid of it.
They just get rid of it. They don't try to ever use it again or anything like that.
And you touched upon keeping, feeding deer, but the problem with that is whitetail deer, especially this far north, they're going to yard. They're going to yard. They're going to congregate. That's always been a survival mechanism for them, Paul.
Yeah. So I mean, you're
not to get in large groups, and there was survival in numbers as far as creating trails and where they yarded and stuff. So you're not going to get rid of that. I mean, they don't live alone in the wintertime.
No.
This far north.
No, they're communal.
Yeah. During the winter. Yeah.
So that's where when I think, I'm like, how can we prevent transmission? And like I said, we have a lot of knowledge gaps about transmission and stuff like that, just because it has been so insidious in nature of it spreading. It's just kind of, it had quietly kind of made its way to, and they don't have any really good handle on that one precipitous event that it all stemmed from.
Right.
So
where'd it come from?
You can't find out where did this originate from? How did this happen?
Yeah.
They don't have their thumb on that. So that makes it hard to, figure out where to go from there if you can't understand exactly how this thing.
Yeah. But it's funny, it's funny how nature works in the regard that oftentimes where those occur, there's large populations.
Yeah.
Too many.
Yeah.
Too many.
And
it's funny how nature can work and come in and level the playing field.
That's the thing, and we think as, people that can reason, we give ourselves, I think, too much credit sometimes. We think we're smarter than we actually are.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Right? And we're kind of like, okay, yeah, we know this, and this. We get this figured out.
Yeah.
Move to the side. Yeah. I got this all under control. So you go and do something.
And nature will...
And then you start see boys, I didn't plan on that happening. No. It's so, again, that's where we come back to, it's a complex system.
It is.
And to think that...
We can't control it.
You can get what they call a reductionist mindset, where you reduce it down to, and we'll go back to the antibody thing, we get an antibody response, boom, we're good. This is going to, prevent this illness.
Yeah.
And step out of the way, I got it. And it's well, this is a complex system. There's a lot of interplay between a lot of different things that you can't predict.
Right.
One thing that you do might affect something 5 steps downstream.
Right.
That you never even knew existed maybe at the time.
Yeah.
And then it's
yeah.
I mean, didn't that happen? We'll look at stalking fish, which Maine has done a good job of keeping stalked fish off of native populations.
Right.
They're very cognizant of that now.
Yeah.
I think they learned from the mistakes of other states.
Yeah.
I got to assume. But didn't Rangeley, when they put in salmon
and smelt,
they had a tremendous brook trout fishery.
They did.
And
Yeah.
Now I'm digging deep into the memory bank on this stuff, but
back in the 1800s, 14-pound brook trout, 10, 12, 14 pound
before
brook
they
trout.
kept record of record trout, record fish being caught. So they figured, well, heck, salmon would do well. So they put salmon in, right?
Right.
And it toasted the blueback?
The bluebacks. I think the smelt have a big effect on the bluebacks. Okay. That is why Big Reed Pond, they killed Big Reed Pond.
Okay.
They reclaimed it, and it was the smelt that endangered the blueback.
Okay.
So oftentimes, you're right, it's something small that you wouldn't think would have an effect on something large.
Yeah.
And one of the biologists years ago, when we went fishing up in, we were at Clear Lake, and he was telling me, and we were catching whitefish. And whitefish are a real rare type of fish now in our waterways, and I think they used to be common at one time. But he explained to me that it didn't bode well in Clear Lake because history had showed them that wherever a smelt population became, sustaining and thrived, the whitefish disappeared.
All right.
And I asked him the same thing. Well, whitefish are 3, 4, 5 pounds.
Yeah,
How would a little smelt? He says it's when the whitefish are little, the smelt kill them.
Yeah.
Feed on them.
So there are things, I guess we can get into this trap where we think that we're smarter than what we actually are.
Right.
Sometimes we don't know what we don't know.
Right.
And what we don't know.
And the lessons are
sometimes
hard.
The most important.
Yeah, and the lessons come hard after that. After you've done something like that, there's no turning back in a lot of situations.
No, you've done the
damage.
The irreversible.
And we're dealing with it. We talked about it last week. We're dealing with it now in the Fish River chain of lakes with the whitefish.
Yeah.
They're not going away.
No.
They're not going away. They're here to stay, and they will have an effect in some form or fashion. They think mainly on brook trout, but who knows, you know. They occupy a space in the water, and in doing so, they take away from they outcompete.
Yep.
Especially, I guess, brook trout. So that's where they're thinking they're going to have the biggest effect on the brook trout population.
Fishery? Yeah.
So maybe not so much on salmon and togue, but brook trout. But they're here to stay.
Yeah.
And so
as far as stalking is concerned, I think Maine has done well preserving what we got now at this point, and learn from other states' mistakes. And, well, I don't know what the heck I'm going to title this one.
Yeah.
This kind of went all over the place.
Yeah, we were all over the map.
And I told myself, I got to be careful because I can get into down some. But to me, it's interesting stuff.
Yeah.
And so I guess in short, chronic wasting disease is a demented deer.
Zombie disease.
I wonder if our president has chronic wasting disease.
Yeah.
I just say that out loud?
Yeah, you did. Yeah. I won't respond to that.
He's just a demented circus monkey.
There might be 1 or 2 people out there that actually like him and think he's doing a good job. So.
Oh, well. I am who I am. If you don't like it.
Yeah. Tune out.
Sorry. Sorry, not sorry. But anyway, anything else that is pertinent to this random?
Yeah, like I say, one of the things we always talk about, Paul, and we're being outdoorsmen. Outdoorsmen always the weather's a big thing to outdoorsmen.
Well, I was thinking about that the other day because we always end up talking about the weather. But one, it plays a role in how you're going to perform whatever outdoor activity. Yep. 2, it's also a safety. Component. So if we're going to talk about like ice thickness, you're thinking of, what's the snowpack? What have the temperatures been?
Well, the wind's blowing 40 miles an hour out of the northwest. I'm staying off Square Lake. It changes your entire day. Where you're going to do your activities, or maybe the same way hunting. We've been in the woods when trees have been coming down and stuff, and it probably wasn't safe to be in the woods.
Probably wasn't a good idea to be in the woods. But.
Yeah. So, you change your activities and stuff. And
there was that day, it was a Thanksgiving day. That week was brutally cold. Remember, we had sub-zero temps. Thanksgiving Day, the high, I believe, was 9 degrees.
That was just a couple of years ago, wasn't it, Paul? Yeah.
We had 40-mile-an-hour winds that day.
Yeah.
Gusts up to I don't know what. And I think it was you. Didn't you come face-to-face with the doe down in the woods, and she just kind of like stood there and looked at you?
I did on a deer trail. I don't know if it was that day or not, but I think...
I think you both were like...
She was on a migration trail, and I was walking north, and she was walking south.
Like, what the heck are we doing out here right now?
Yeah, she had to live there. I didn't. I didn't have to be there. But
that was brutal.
Yeah.
Wind, I don't know what the wind chill was that day. That would have been...
Yeah.
We had some frozen pipes.
That was the night we get back and the old camp when it wasn't insulated or anything, and while we were having supper, the pipe froze, spewing water all over the pump room there and stuff. So, come here.
I guess we're gonna close this out.
Yep.
We got some company coming in.
What are you doing, bud? Come here.
All right, sit on Papa's lap.
Come here.
You want to say something real quick?
TV.
Hey,
we're gonna get you on TV.
Can you say goodbye to everybody? Can you say?
You say.
I'm gonna say, get outside, and you say it's good for the soul.
Look at the camera and say that. It's good for the soul. Good job, Bo. Good job, buddy. Good job.
Good job, man.